This conference will now be recorded.
I want to hand over the official welcoming duties to my colleague Vienna Poser from Environment and Climate Change Canada. Just before I do so, I just wanted to also point out that we have some instructions for today's webinar, which include asking everyone if you're not a presenter to have your microphones and cameras off so that we can avoid any connection issues that might arise due to that. And we're also asking everyone to keep or put your questions in the chat option. And Vienna, who is serving as today's moderator, will be reading them out in the question periods. So just take a quick look at the instructions here, and then I will hand things over to Vienna. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tanya. And it's so lovely to not necessarily see everyone, but connect with everyone today. Before the meeting started, we were able to see a couple smiling faces on the line, and it's such a great way to connect. And so I'm happy to see that you are all healthy and well, and happy to connect with you today. So today's agenda, we'll start off with some welcoming remarks. And then Tanya will lead us in an overview of the draft outline and consultation process for the peer review document that's been released, followed by a Q&A session. As Tanya noted, we'll be taking questions in the chat function. UN Women Verona will be leading us in a discussion on initial views on the draft outlined, and then we will hear from our colleagues from Malawi and Mexico on some country action on gender and biodiversity, followed again by a Q&A session, and then some quick closing remarks. So we have a lot to cover from now until 10, and so I look forward to get started, but maybe some quick comments from the perspective of the Friends of Gender Equality Group. This is an initiative that was co-created by Malawi and Canada back in July of 2018, and we've met at every major CBD meeting since July of 2018, and Canada is so proud to be a part of this initiative and to be part of in kind of bringing this group together. It's a group of parties but also stakeholders that are interested in advancing gender equality considerations within the work of the CBD. We know that gender equality is such an important part in terms of achieving the 3 objectives of the CBD, and so this group has been gathering in the margins of meetings to help discuss and strategize and share ideas around how to advance those objectives in the context of the current negotiations. In the last year, we've been focusing a lot on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and happy to be looking now towards kind of the new gender plan of action for leading us into the future as well. So look forward to hearing all the interesting views and look forward to commenting on this next document. And maybe I'll turn to my colleague Stella Gama from Malawi. In terms of as the co-convener of the Friends of Gender Equality Group also, I'd like to invite her to maybe say some words.
Vienna, and everyone, I can't connect my camera. Okay, great. It is great to link up with you again after some time. And as Vienna has highlighted, gender, it is to support gender activities under the convention from the, I would say, countries with the same interests. And from COP14, we may recall that parties requested the Secretariat to review the gender plan of action, because there was a foreseen need that we need a gender responsive post-2020 global diversity framework. And the review itself suggested that a new gender plan of be developed, and that this should also have measurable targets. So it is my pleasure as well, as Canada has highlighted, that we are meeting today to have an initial initial sharing of comments on the consolidated document, the draft that has been prepared. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stella. Next.
Hello, am I online?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Stella. Next in our group of welcoming remarks, we will be hearing from, very pleased to hear from the CBD Executive Secretary, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma-Marema.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Thank you, and thank you to join this important meeting on an important issue, particularly for the women and the girls. Dear colleagues and friends, I hope you and your families, first of all, are all well, despite the challenging times we are all in, but it also has given us this opportunity to connect virtually. And I would like to take this opportunity, therefore, to thank you for participating in these discussions today on the development of the new Gender Plan of Action under the Convention on Biological Diversity, and for your interest and engagement in contributing to this process. We know that women play critical roles in the sustainable use and conservation of biodiversity. They are the farmers, they are the fishers, livestock keepers, forest dwellers, entrepreneurs, and small business owners, and many other trademarks the women do. In many parts of the world, women are now playing an increasing role in the management of agriculture due to the rural out migration to towns, cities, and other, largely by men. Wow. Women play a similarly important but often overlooked role in fisheries, with their involvement in direct and secondary activities amounting to about half of the workforce. These responsibilities are carried out in addition to the time-consuming, demanding, and often unpaid household and community-related tasks that traditionally fall to women. Despite these considerable roles and responsibilities, women continue to have less access than men to natural resources, notably land, as well as to production inputs and critical services, including education, extension, and credits. Women also remain underrepresented in decision-making related to biodiversity management at all levels, unfortunately. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified the burden of responsibility and negative consequences for women and girls, including in the form of growing shadow pandemic of violence against women and girls in communities and countries around the world. Options to build back better must therefore ensure and include equal representation of women and their views in all COVID-19 response planning and decision-making, ensuring inclusive and equitable employment opportunities, as well as ensuring women and girls are targeted in all efforts to address the impacts of this crisis. As you're likely aware, 2020 had been heralded as the super year for nature to increase commitment and action on biodiversity. It is also a super year for gender. As you know, 2020 marks the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Platform for Action and a renewed call to action for human rights, including gender equality and equal rights for women on the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Charter. At COP15, parties agreed to a gender-responsive process to develop the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. While the process is still underway, now to 2021, we are working to see that the framework and its implementation will also be gender responsive, as has been called for by the CBD parties. A gender responsive approach is needed to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature, while biodiversity is conserved and ecosystem services maintained to sustain a healthy planet and delivering benefits essential for all people. We recognize that issues of equity and equality influence who is affected by and who benefits from actions to conserve, restore, and sustainably use biodiversity. And 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development reinforces the mandate and the message that gender equality and empowerment of women is central to the achievements of sustainable development, in pursuit of which no one, and really no one, should be left behind. And this includes the women and the young girls and the girls. It is our intention in the Secretariat to build on the efforts and the achievements to date by the parties and our partners to take forward the agenda for gender and biodiversity into the post-2020 period that enables transformative change where women and girls can equally contribute to and benefit from the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and the utilization of genetic resources. I invite you to consider the draft outline that has been prepared as the basis for our consultations for the development of new gender plan of action for the post-2020 period. It puts forward issues from women leadership to land rights and gender-based violence, as well as access to benefits, including employment and the needs related to capacity building, financing, and reporting, among others. Your views, ideas, and inputs on this draft and throughout the process that will follow will help us to prepare a plan that really responds to the critical issues being faced by women and girls around the world and meet their needs to truly live in harmony with nature and thus not being left behind in these important debates and actions. We thank you in advance for your guidance and for your advocacy in promoting an equitable and gender-responsive approach to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Thank you all, and I sincerely look forward to the productive exchange of views and discussions that will ensue herefrom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Executive Secretary Marima. Your words obviously help shape and inform the context through which we are speaking and provide a lot of background and help us focus our discussion today. So thank you very much. Our next set of remarks will be coming from SBI Secretary Jyoti Martha Philippe, Director of Implementation Support Division at the CBD Secretariat. Jyoti.
Thank you so much, Vienna, and thank you everyone who has joined the webinar today, our new normal. I cannot add a lot after Elizabeth has spoken, our Executive Secretary. She has basically put all of our hopes and processes to you already. But I just wanted to thank you for your participation in today's webinar to launch this consultation on a draft outline for agenda plan of action for the post-2020 period. As you know, due to the ongoing global pandemic that we are in right now, we have extended the timeframe for the process to develop the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and the subsidiary body meetings are currently scheduled for November, and the 15th meeting of COP is planned for May 2021. These may be extended, we don't know. We are keeping everything under a review, but we would like to make use of this extended time frame to ensure that we have robust and ambitious gender plan of action that will be adopted at COP15 at the same time as the Global Biodiversity Framework. We've also been working very closely with the SAPTA and SBI chairs, as well as the co-chairs of the post-2020 process. And we have been providing a lot of webinars and online peer review documents, which we haven't done in the past because of lack of time, but we're doing a lot of this online now. And this also includes some documents that will be discussed under SAPTA 24, such as the draft monitoring framework, which is available for peer review till the end of this week. So if you have not sent your remarks on your review on these documents, we encourage you to do so. The deadline is 15th of August. Also, in keeping with the agreement that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will be gender responsive, as the Executive Secretary just explained, and following the results of the review of implementation of the 2015-2020 Gender Plan of Action, the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation has proposed to discuss both the review document and a draft outline of a gender plan of action for the post-2020 period. Today's webinar marks the start of a consultation process to which we hope you will all be engaged and also send it out much more widely for others to be engaged, all your networks. And this process is to obtain the input from parties and stakeholders on the structure of a new plan, which following these further inputs, we hope we will develop the plan to be considered for adoption at COP15. At COP15, we're hoping we will have a package that will operationalize the Global Biodiversity Framework, and this Gender Plan of Action is a very important part of that package. And we really hope that it will be adopted at COP15 and with your input. So just to reiterate, we are using this time available prior to COP15 to develop a robust and ambitious plan, which can support the gender responsive implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and to support the achievement of the sustainable goals and related international commitments. Your engagement and input are key to this process to ensure that we have an outcome that demonstrates clear commitment for effective action on the critical issues being faced by women and girls in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in communities and countries around the world. So I sincerely hope that you will contribute well to this process so that we can go to COP15 with a very, very good gender action plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jyoti, for those remarks. In the hope of catching up a little bit on our agenda, I'll be turning to Tanya Mcgregor, who is the Gender Program Officer at the CBD Secretariat, to provide an overview of the draft outline and the consultation process. Tanya.
Thanks very much, Vienna, and also Jyoti and Executive Secretary Ms. Marema. And thanks to all of you today for joining. I'm very happy to see so many people online and so many familiar faces, especially given that we are in, I think, the doldrums of the holiday period in August, and I know many people are away or otherwise occupied. So it's especially great that you're with us today for this. And as Vienna just mentioned, I'll be giving an overview of the draft outline as well as the proposed consultation process for the outline and the gender plan of action. So for my discussion, I'm just going to give a bit of a view of the rationale and the basis for the development of a new gender plan of action. Also giving some guideposts or small p principles for the development of the draft outline, going over the structure and key components of the draft outline, and also highlighting the guiding questions that have been put forward for initial feedback, as well as the proposed consultation process, following which we will have a Q&A period. So please put any questions in the chat. And with that, I'll move on to the next slide. Thanks. So, so as I mentioned, the basis for this looking to develop a new gender plan of action has come in part from the review of implementation of the current plan that was requested at COP14, the last meeting of the parties in 2018. So this review was undertaken at the end of 2019 and early 2020, early this year, looking at gender references in the 6 national reports that had been received to date, and also through 2 global surveys. One was to parties and one was directed to other relevant organizations to get input on the implementation of the plan, but also to get some input from a forward-looking perspective on what might be needed for the post-2020 period. So some of the findings that came from that were that the current gender plan was seen to be valuable as a policy and advocacy tool, giving a mandate to integrate gender and biodiversity activities. It was also put forward that a new plan should be developed for the post-2020 period and to be developed in a participatory and consultative manner. One of the things that was identified was the need to better link a global plan with national implementation, as well as a need for clear, actionable, and measurable gender biodiversity objectives for supporting implementation, long-term investment, and concerted action. And furthermore, for gender responsive implementation in the post-2020 period, it was seen that gender would need to be fully mainstreamed in national biodiversity strategies and action plans, or NBSAPs, as well as integrated into the review process for the post-2020 framework and addressed in national reporting. So these are some of the main findings that came from this, and the full review document is available as noted in the SBI web pages on the CBD website. So I'll just go to the next slide. So in addition to this review, in early 2019, in April 2019, the Secretariat, along with UN Women, co-organized an expert workshop to get input on addressing gender in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So this was one specific consultation that was held on looking at gender in the upcoming framework, and this included party representatives from different regions, as well as representatives from different organizations who are addressing gender and biodiversity issues. So some of the recommendations that came from this included the need to increase women's leadership, participation and access to decision-making forum, including through such things as quotas to ensure women's equitable representation, looking at strengthening women's collective action, including the participation of women's collectives in decision-making, promoting and protecting women's rights and access, control, and ownership over resources, notably land. And this is something that is also reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals in many places. And lastly, enabling actions to enhance and ensure equitable benefits and human well-being. And so this is referring to broadly speaking benefits that may be derived from biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, as well as from the utilization of genetic resources. And this was also meant to encompass implementation mechanisms, which may include things such as capacity building. So the full report on the workshop is available on the post-2020 website on the gender page. But just to say also that these recommendations were further discussed and refined in other meetings on the margins of CBD meetings over the past year or so, which included the 2 open-ended working group meetings and the subsidiary body meetings that were held in November. So they have been further developed. But I think, as you have seen or may have seen if you have taken a look at the draft outline already, that these ideas are represented there. So I'll just move on to the next slide. So the draft outline for the Gender Plan of Action, as I mentioned and has been mentioned also by Jyoti, that this is happening now in part because we have this extended time period now before the subsidiary body meetings, which are scheduled for November, and for the COP, which is currently scheduled for May of 2021. So we want to make the best use of this time to ensure that we can really have a participatory and consultative process, even if it is largely online. And so that's what we're beginning with now with the release of this outline. So the guiding principles or guideposts that helped inform the development of this outline included the need for alignment with the zero draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So the zero draft is available, has been available since the open-ended working group earlier this year, and it is also accompanied now by the monitoring framework, which is, as Jyoti mentioned, online and available for peer review up until the end of this week. So looking at alignment with what is proposed in the draft, and specifically what is proposed in the draft Target 20, which is the only target so far in the monitoring framework that refers directly to gender equality, issues of gender equality and matters related to women and girls. So specifically, this target is referring to equitable participation in decision-making and ensuring rights over relevant resources for Indigenous peoples and local communities, women and girls, and youth. So in addition to this context, we're also looking at trying to support gender responsive implementation of the framework as a whole at national, subnational, and local levels. Also looking to focus on actions by parties and the engagement of all relevant stakeholders. And this is a bit of a departure from the current plan, which is very much focused on actions by the Secretariat. So this is intended to shift to ensure that action at the national level can really be owned and taken forward by parties and other partners. And the other, among other guideposts or principles include the need for clear, actionable, and measurable objectives, as well as the alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals and other relevant international commitments. So that's forming the basis for which this draft outline has been developed. So I'll just move to the next slide. So to give it an overview of the structure of the draft outline, as you may have seen, what is proposed so far, or at this initial stage, is a document that includes 3 sections. So the first is a section on draft action areas, which is essentially put forward right now as placeholder language, but is intended to reflect key priority areas to address gender in the context of the post-2020 framework, and it's associated with a number of objectives that can be used to achieve these action areas. So I'll go into those a bit further in the next slide, but before I do that, the section 2 is looking at implementation support mechanisms, and this is aligned with the structure, the current structure of the zero draft framework, and that is identifies a number of implementation support mechanisms, such as resources and capacity building and knowledge generation. So there are objectives identified in the outline related to these mechanisms. And the third section addresses the remaining sections of the post-2020 framework, which refer to responsibility and transparency, as well as outreach, awareness, and uptake. So those, again, there is a number of objectives identified in relation to these areas in the framework. So I'll speak to those a little bit more in the next slide, but I also wanted to mention that what is put forward under each of these sections is also a heading including highlighting the coherence with relevant international commitments. So this is highlighting the linkages with the Sustainable Development Goals and gender action plans under the Climate Change Convention, as well as the Convention to Combat Desertification, among others, as a means of putting forward what has already been agreed and adopted under other international agreements, and also what can be done under the CBD, under this convention, to support the achievement of these agreements, of these commitments. Additional components which aren't identified in this version of the outline are proposed to come after, once we have some agreement or some more feedback on this initial version. The thinking is that we can look at identifying national and subnational actions that may correspond with the priority action areas and their objectives, as well as identifying main actors responsible for carrying things forward. So this is, again, to address that idea or need for ensuring support for national implementation. So just to say, this wasn't put forward in this version of the outline because we wanted to focus just on getting input at this first stage on priority action areas and related objectives. And so, as I've noted here, the draft outline is available at the review page on the SBI review page in the CBD website. So I'll just move to the next slide. So this, just to give you a bit of a more in-depth overview of the draft outline. The draft action areas, as I mentioned, are based quite directly on the language from the draft Target 20 of the draft monitoring framework that is now out on the post-2020 framework. So this is referring to, again, ensuring equitable participation in decision-making related to biodiversity for women and girls, as well as ensuring rights over relevant resources for women and girls. So that's the language coming directly from the target, and that is put forward for now as a placeholder for us to use as a basis for inputs to develop what we might consider to be priority action areas. And the third one is also very much related and is labeled as advancing gender responsive implementation of the framework overall, and that is sort of encapsulated as ensuring equitable benefits for women and girls. So there are objectives identified in each of these areas for participation, looking at women's leadership and engagement in governance, biodiversity governance in bodies at different levels, looking at their women's engagement and delegates' engagement in CBD processes, also looking at gender responsive implementation of MBSAPs and national reporting. And ensuring rights over relevant resources is also talking about specifically legal and societal barriers that prevent women from accessing land and other key resources, and also looking at the critical issue of gender-based violence and violence against women human rights defenders. They're women environmental rights defenders. And lastly, in terms of benefits, also looking at employment as well as other aspects of benefits for women and girls. So for implementation support mechanisms, again, this is coming from these areas have been identified in the draft monitoring framework, and they include resources, capacity building, generation and sharing of scientific knowledge, as well as partnerships and collaboration. So generally speaking, this is looking at objectives are proposed to look at adequate finances and human resources for gender responsive implementation, ensuring adequate capacity building, including knowledge and collection of sex disaggregated data, looking at the engagement of women's groups and their representatives in these processes. And lastly, responsibility and transparency, as well as outreach, awareness, and uptake. This includes looking at the review process to make sure it is gender responsive, monitoring and reporting, which is also looking at gender responsive national reporting and ensuring that women's groups and their representatives are participating and engaged actively in outreach and awareness raising activities. So that's a very broad overview of what is in the outline so far, but it's all available online for you to look at in more detail. In the interest of time, I will go on to the next slide. And so this is the just a overview of the questions that have been put forward that are both in the draft outline document as well as in the review template, which is online that the site mentioned. And so these are just paraphrased here, but they include questions such as, are these the right priority areas? Are the priority gender issues well reflected? Are there other priorities you would propose for action areas or for objectives? Are there other topics or related objectives you would identify in respect to implementation support or in respect to areas of responsibility and transparency, outreach and awareness and uptake? So these questions are meant to help guide the preparation of input. It is not necessary that you answer them specifically or only them if you have other inputs related to the structure itself and what should be proposed. That is equally welcome. This is just to give a basis for feedback. And as I've noted here, that at the initial the deadline for this initial feedback is August 31st. I know this is not ideal timing for a lot of people since it's summertime for many people and many people are on holiday. If we have any opportunity to extend this, we will certainly consider doing so. The consultation process in any case will be ongoing. It continues through to the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, as well as to COP15 itself. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, just to give you an overview of the consultation process in more detail. So this is what is tentatively proposed so far, that right now we have this initial consultation period, which is open till August 31st, which is looking specifically at getting inputs on priority action areas and objectives. From there, we aim to prepare a revised outline for review, which may be put forward at SBI 3. And we would again be requesting inputs on that outline. And then look at obtaining inputs for national, subnational actions and main actors, and getting inputs again on a revised or further developed plan, which includes actions at the national and subnational level, and with the goal of having a proposed plan for discussion and adoption at COP15, which is, as mentioned, currently proposed to be held in May of 2021. So in addition to this period, this consultation process, there is also the ongoing process for inputs into the development of the post-2020 framework itself, which are largely happening at the subsidiary body meetings now in SUBSA 24 in November, and the third meeting of the open-ended working group, which will be held sometime in 2021, and those will variously be looking at goals, targets, and indicators. So it's also very important that gender aspects are included in those consultation processes as well. And lastly, I just wanted to note the best practices review. There was a call recently for inputs on best practices in gender and biodiversity action, and we were lucky to receive many submissions from different countries and different representatives from different organizations. And so this is all going to help identify the types of relevant actions for the post-2020 period. So thank you very much for your inputs on that. And with that, I will go to the penultimate slide. So I just wanted to bring to your attention here, again, you may have seen this already, but this is a recent publication by the CBD that highlights gender issues and actions and biodiversity objectives. And this is specifically talking about objectives that relate to the issues put forward under the Aichi targets, which are in large part many of the same issues put forward under the post-2020 framework. So you may want to look at this as a basis for developing inputs for this consultation as well. So with that, I think I've come to the end of my presentation. The next slide is for the Q&A. And I know I went a little fast there, but I wanted to make sure we have enough time for questions so that we can use the time we all have together online to go over any questions that may have arisen. But you know, I recognize that this plan has just been made available in the past week, so we're not asking for questions specifically on the content of the plan so much as to make clear or to ensure that it's understood what is proposed as the structure so far, that it's understood what types of input are requested, and that the proposed consultation process is understood. So that's the intention of having this discussion period now. I'm not sure if we have any questions, but I will hand it over to Vienna to handle this. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you for that great presentation, giving us a sense of what to expect for the peer review or the review process. So we do have a couple questions. The first question coming in from Halima Bawari. How does the biodiversity gender plan relate to that of the UNFCCC gender plan?
I'm sorry, I just had to unmute myself again. It's okay. I think it's aware, if you look at the draft outline, you can see in a number of places where there's a direct reference to activities that are included in the current climate change gender plan of action or gender plan. So there are some direct linkages there. I think, and I believe Fleur may be on, so she may be able to speak to the UNFCCC plan as well. The structure in some ways is similar in that it's structured around a set of priority areas. And these are very much similar in many ways, I would say, between the Climate Change Convention and the CBD, in that issues of capacity building and issues of coherence with other international frameworks are important. I know under the UNFCCC process, there is a lot of focus on gender balance in the constituted bodies of the Climate Change Convention, which is a bit of a different, it's not as much of a prominent focus, I would say, under the CBD. It's certainly important for us to ensure that we have adequate representation of women in CBD processes, but I think the disparity is maybe not quite as large, and we also don't have the same structure in terms of the convention, in terms of the constituted bodies. And I think I'm probably forgetting some of the other aspects of the climate change plan, but I know there may be some people online that can speak to that side of things as well. So I invite any of you who are online from Climate Change Convention to make any comments.
Thank you, Tanya. And perhaps while waiting, if any of the climate change colleagues want to chime in, we have a number of questions that are rolling in. This one is from Scott Wilson from Canada. It's a process question. It would seem that there will be substantive additions and changes made after SBI 3. What mechanism will be used for parties to review the final draft plan before it gets presented to COP15?
Good question. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, this is something we've been discussing because it is a bit different than normal procedure, but given the timeframes, it was felt that we don't have enough time to really have something finalized for SBI 3 that would be from there ready to go directly to COP. So I guess the idea right now, or things may change if meetings are further delayed, but the proposal is that we would request parties to provide further inputs after SBI 3, and then we would make another draft document available similar as we are doing now through an online process for consultation in advance of COP15, so that the document there would be an opportunity for further comment, and a document would be finalized and made available well in advance of COP15 for discussion at COP15. So I think that the aim throughout this is to give as much opportunity as possible for parties and other stakeholders to comment on each step and each kind of revision of this plan, so that what we come out with in the end is something that can be owned and very much backed by parties as well as other stakeholders.
Thank you, Tanya. And I note that we have Emma Letellier from France, who's noted that there are several references are made to the UNFCCC plan of action, and noting that the plan has served as looks like it served as an inspiration for both the biodiversity plan and how they echo each other. We have a follow-up. We have an additional, more of a comment than a question from Lena Aguilar. Congratulations. I really welcome the important place to implementation. The challenge is going to be on actions to support at the national and local levels. And we also have Stella from Malawi, who noted that it will be important to include an objective that will address access to appropriate technology. And then we'll have a question from Karina Voy on what indicators will be used to monitor the action plan.
Okay. In terms of indicators, okay, I was going to say for the framework, there is a request right now for input on indicators. And so we're hoping to receive from parties and others suggestions on gender responsive indicators. And what I understand so far from what has been received, there's been very little on gender in the indicators. So that's something that I hope we can improve in the time that we have in the process as it goes forward. In terms of the action plan, I think that is something we will certainly need to determine once we have objectives and actions or activities defined. Then we will need to determine a set of indicators to be able to monitor it effectively. I mean, this is a question that I haven't maybe thought enough about, but I think there is really, ideally, these indicators would be include those that are put forward for the post-2020 framework itself, if we have gender responsive indicators for the framework, so that they could support the reporting by parties. But as I mentioned, we are still short in having good and robust and replicable indicators at that level. So that is something that is going to need some further work.
Thank you, Tanya. Knowing that we're falling a little bit behind, perhaps I'll just go to one or two more questions and then a quick response from Tanya on both those questions, and then we can move on, and we can perhaps circle back if there's time at the end of the meeting for some additional responses to the online chat. One question is more about process. What happens if SBI is postponed? Is there a plan to continue the discussion, seminars, consultations virtually? And then there's a second question from Vivienne Salis. Are you planning any particular meeting for receiving inputs, especially coming from IPLCs? If so, when and where?
Okay, so for the first question, in terms of if SBI 3 is postponed, certainly we would be considering further online consultations, so that we would just move forward with the development of the plan or the outline, and following that, the plan as we are doing now. So I think whether or not SBI 3 goes ahead in November, we will still be working to have the plan developed along that same timeline. And then the last question was IPLC's a designated consultation. I haven't identified a designated consultation for that. If it's something that people think is important and that there is interest in doing so, I think it's certainly something we can pursue. But actually, I should note that that would have to be online, and I know that can be a challenge for having adequate participation from IPLC. So that is also something we would need to consider in terms of the logistics.
Thank you, Tanya. I think, sorry, and I might have misread the question. It was not, well, it was noting specifically IPLCs, but it was a broader consultation with other stakeholders and parties and so on. But I assume that the response would be the same.
Yeah, I mean, this is intended to be a broad consultation, you know, as much as for parties as for other stakeholders. So I think that's the spirit in which all of the consultation exercises will be put forward, and a lot of it is based on how much outreach we can make to different groups to let them know that this is happening. So I also ask for your support in reaching out to your networks and engaging them in this process.
Thank you. I know that there's some additional questions that have rolled in, but we are running a little bit behind on our schedule. So I'm going to be moving to a presentation of initial views on the draft outline by Verona Calantis, who is who is the intergovernmental specialist at UN Women. Verona.
Thank you very much, Tanya, for organizing these very important consultations, and very nice to see virtually and to hear some of you. I'm very pleased to represent some of my feedback, some of the initial views on the draft outline, and it's really very helpful to have these consultations because we've heard a lot of very good feedback already. So I know I'm conscious of time, so these are really very initial views, and UN Women will be developing further these views in a submission. As we know, there is a submission, formal process for submission. So next slide, please. So basically, I'll just give my general observations, as I mentioned, and provide some specific suggestions or recommendations on the elements and structure of the draft GPA as currently presented to us. Next, please. So just some key messages, and we've heard this already. I'm just trying to reinforce some of them, because this is also what we have gathered from following the processes, multilateral environmental processes, including UNFCCC and UNCBD. For us, the CBD Gender Plan of Action is really can be an effective tool for supporting the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. While there is a specific goal we're looking at the moment, target, and of course this may change, but at the moment there is a specific target, but we also have to be mindful that part of what's important is to ensure gender mainstreaming across the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, across the different targets. And I think that's very clear, and even for many parties who are supporting and advocating for gender responsiveness, this is also the goal. So while we have the draft action areas, we know that this could change depending on how the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework evolves. I also wanted to highlight that the structure of the GPA should be simple and really able to communicate. I think that's always what we want to do, right? To present a document that when anybody reads it, a donor, an implementing entity, a community stakeholder, a scientific community, they know and they can pick some of the areas in the gender action plan that they can contribute to implement. So it's something that speaks to multiple stakeholders. And also to build into the monitoring, the GPA, a monitoring and reporting mechanisms framework. Something that really it's sort of a mandate. It's not a shall, but it's kind of something that will really make sure that we are able to track how we are doing with implementing the gender plan of action. And it's very interesting to hear some questions about how this relates to the UNFCCC, as this is also part of what I wanted to communicate, that there is, of course, the UNFCCC gap, and there is also the UNCCD gap. I think for coherence and synergy, the executive secretary mentioned about this being the super year for nature. And within the UN system, we are actually being asked to think about coherence across the different multilateral environmental conventions and development goals, including the 2030 development goals. So think about synergies. I know all of these processes are developing their own gender action plans, but I think it's important to already review what's out there and see how we can incorporate aspects of what's already there, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which all, the international community, all of us are meant to implement. Next slide, please. So these are just some of my initial observations, just general observations. So we've seen the structure of the draft outline, and it's nice to have a table form. I really like a table format because it makes it, as I said, easy to read, and it communicates well. But I want it to be simpler, and I know that the structure is mirroring the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, but perhaps we can think about how to simplify that, or how to streamline it. So I was thinking that instead of having these three subsections, we can think of just wrapping them up into one section, and that's that there are, rather than objectives, I like the objectives it's up there, but to not divert attention to what needs to be done in specific terms. I think the description of the objectives can be moved up, like in a general framing of the gender action plan, like an introduction to the gender action plan, and we can highlight all of present all the objectives there, including mainstreaming, gender mainstreaming across the post-2020 biodiversity framework. But I think what's very important for me for the gender action plan is this goes back to the question on the UNFCCC, for example, UNFCCC gender action plan, is that you're able to identify specific activities to implement the priority area. And the priority areas, I'll come to that, but I think the priority areas as they are simple and few rather than many is good. But I want to see, we are proposing some specific activities that can be implemented when somebody reads it. They can implement it themselves. You know, it's not like guessing what needs to be done. And Tanya mentioned this as well, that the responsible actors will be identified, and that there's timeline for implementation and specific deliverable per activity, because there was a question about how do we ensure implementation and what are the indicators for implementation. If we have this, if we have the responsible actors, the timeline, and the specific deliverables, that in itself is already a way of tracking implementation. Next slide, please. So just a few comments on the action areas as presented in the draft action plan. So I know that equitable is used in the convention, the word equitable, but for us in UN Women, and also in alignment with other intergovernmental language, including SDG 5, we are proposing, or we would rather adapt or that kind of formulation. So rather than ensure equitable participation, we would propose to ensure women's full, equal, and effective participation. I think this is more powerful, and it's more encompassing, and it really seeks women's contribution. On CBD action area, ensure rights over relevant resources. Again, here we want it to be a little bit broader and more explicit, and also this goes along with the SDG language. Ensure that women and girls have equal rights to resources, including access to, ownership of, and control over natural resources. So again, just making the language more specific and also in alignment with what's already out there. The next slide, I know I have just a minute, I guess, but my two other slides are just examples of how do you, how can we make it in a language, in an activity language? And I gave examples of the UNFCCC gap for us to have some ideas of how to word it, but I'm not gonna go through these specifics because I just want to highlight a few other things that I heard or I've seen in the chat over in the earlier minutes. One is Stella's point about adding an objective and technology, and this was also something that I heard from our colleagues here in UN Women. I think this is an important area for biodiversity. Technology, the aspect of technology, the aspect that was mentioned about engaging the scientific community. Bertha mentioned this in the chat box. And also Vivian mentioned about the engagement of IPLC. I think these are all very important, and I'm just supporting those points as well. So I think I'm gonna stop here and would allow rather for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella, so much. We don't have a great deal of time for questions right now, although if there are any posted in the chat, perhaps Verona, you could respond directly through the chat function to the group. Just in an interest of time, we will be moving to the portion of our discussion or our presentation that focuses kind of not necessarily on the review, but on what are some great examples of country action in terms of advancing gender equality considerations. So we have two groups presenting. We have Malawi. So we'll be hearing from Stella Gama, who's the Director of Forestry, Ministry of Forestry and Natural Resources in Malawi, and we'll be also hearing from Fatso Kalemba, who's the Principal Environment Officer in the Environmental Affairs Department, and also the SUBSTA and ABS focal points from Malawi. We'll be hearing from them first. Ladies.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are. This is Stella Gama from Malawi. I'll briefly highlight what Malawi is doing, just in brief, just to give a few examples, but we are doing a lot. May we have the next slide? And this presentation has been jointly prepared by myself and also Mphatso Kalemba. On the first slide is looking at the status of gender and biodiversity in Malawi, where we are saying that livelihoods predominate, natural resources predominate livelihoods in Malawi, and women are at the center of this. However, there are challenges that impact on women's access and also the availability of these natural resources. Next slide. Malawi has developed a number of strategies, activities to enhance natural resources management in Malawi, and mainstreaming of gender into NBSAP has also been one of the actions that we have done. We have developed gender-specific targets to address biodiversity and gender considerations, for example, Target 15. We have also assigned gender focal points to ministries. So each ministry has a gender focal point. And for the ministries which are addressing environmental and biodiversity issues, the gender focal points are supposed to ensure that issues of biodiversity are integrated into that ministry's work, and that gender is in the forefront of that integration. Next slide, please. On ensuring equitable participation in decision-making related to biodiversity for women and girls, the government of Malawi has collaborated with a number of programs. And we have given an example here of the Millennium Challenge Cooperation support to implement environment and natural resources management project in one of the main catchments of Malawi, of the biggest river, the Shire River. The findings from the studies done by this program and other studies show that women are involved in implementation activities, preparation activities, implementation activities. However, the women have limited participation in decision making. For example, we have village natural resource management committees, which are supposed to look at natural resources at local level. The issue of gender balance, we would say we have achieved it. The target for Malawi is either 40-60 or 60-40. So in most of these committees, whether it's the village natural resource management committees, we also have catchment management committees and other committees managing the environment, natural resources, and biodiversity. Gender balance, I would say that we are doing well on gender balance. And sometimes we have that, we will see that the committees, maybe they're even mostly women participating in a few committees where you find that it's dominated by men. However, even though we have these women in decision-making bodies at local level, the decisions themselves, they are influenced by men. You find that the chiefs who are men in that area will influence the decision of those committees. So there is still a gap in decision making. Participation, we are getting there. So we need enhanced empowerment for women to participate fully in the decision making as well, not just participating in body. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, ensuring rights over relevant resources for women and girls. In Malawi, in most areas, we have a matrilineal society. In other areas, we have patrilineal. Patrilineal, where the men are in charge, they own the assets. Matrilineal, it is the women who own assets. However, in the matrilineal society, you still see that the women, they own the assets, but men remain the decision makers. They are in control of whatever is happening. If you own a woodlot, it is the man who is in control of which species to plant and what the outcomes of that woodlot, how they should be used. And this is actually even worse for single ladies in matrilineal society, where you have the uncle or the brothers controlling the ladies. So gendered access and control to natural resources, to agricultural assets, to biodiversity varies between men and women, and it is a challenge mostly in matrilineal societies. Next slide, please. Ensuring collection of sex disaggregated data. The time when people were being made aware of integration of gender in our work, most people ensured that we have gender disaggregated data when we are reporting our activities. And we have done that ourselves in environment, in forestry, in biodiversity, in agriculture, they also do that. In forestry, for example, when we were preparing the Malawi forest landscape restoration strategy, we have sex disaggregated data collected, and that information was analyzed and used for development of the strategy. However, the other challenge that we have is that people do not know how to use that data. It has been collected, but what should it be used for in implementing the activities? So the analysis of the gender data and using it for project management, for program management, and also for day-to-day activities, there is a big gap. We'll just say, okay, 20 women planted trees, 15 men participated in tree planting, but what does that mean, and how should we use that information for upcoming activities? Another program that we have used we have collected gender disaggregated data. It's a youth restoration program in Malawi, and data show that most of the female youth are the ones who are in the forefront of participating in this youth restoration program. But what does that mean for the benefits that accrue from the youth afforestation programs? Are the female youth, how are they using that the benefits that they are collecting from the project? But also, is the design of the program taking into consideration that it is mostly female youth who are participating? So those things, it is still a gap. We are just collecting the information and then we just say, okay, there's gender balance or there's no gender balance, but what actions next? Next slide, please. On equitable benefits for women and girls, we need to ensure that we have equitable benefits for women and girls. Based on a social and gender enhancement assessment, it was established that deforestation and soil erosion, for example, emanating from charcoal production, is one of the main drivers of biodiversity. And when we look at the participation of people, for example, the charcoal production that has been highlighted, mostly it is the men who are producing charcoal. The women are on the receiving side, utilization of the charcoal in the homes. Therefore, we were saying that new alternatives to support livelihoods are required. The men should be provided with new alternatives so that they withdraw from the charcoal production. But also at the household level, women should be given alternative energy sources. So this is an example of getting the data and using it for future activities. Also on the same, we have noted that around 75% of women under the projects are participating in other environmentally friendly programs, such as beekeeping, fish farming, and other diversification incomes. On the other hand, you see that the illegal extraction of wood from forest reserves which have high biodiversity, the charcoal production, the clearing of gardens in protected areas, it is being done by men. So how do we address the needs of the men? How do we address the needs of women so that we conserve biodiversity? So women have been the champions of biodiversity interventions and environment-friendly alternatives. We need to empower them so that they continue to be champions, to improve their livelihood and also contribute effectively to biodiversity conservation. Next slide, please.
Hi,
Looking at the...
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to say if we're running out of time, unfortunately, and we still have. So if you could maybe wrap up in the next minute or so, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do just that. The gender and the post-2020 framework. In short, what is it that we need to do? For example, for Malawi, we need the gender focal points of the ministries to be, their capacity to be enhanced, to be strengthened. The issue of champions, we need to promote champions for biodiversity conservation, whether it's going to be chiefs, whether it's going to be prominent women in the villages to champion the campaign for biodiversity conservation and also the gender issues. We need to strengthen integration of gender into the NBSAP. It's already there, but we can add more value. National biodiversity-related strategies and the actions of the ministries, we also need to strengthen that. There are many entry points. Next slide. There are many entry points that we can look at, and the most important entry point is the assessment of gender mainstreaming, gender analysis. For all the activities that we are doing, we need to collect information, analyze that, and what does that mean for gender activities. Thank you very much. Let me end there.
Thank you so much, Stella, and I apologize for cutting that discussion short. It was really great to hear all the wonderful, amazing things that Malawi is doing in advancing gender considerations domestically. Without further ado, we'll move to our colleague from Mexico. So I'd invite Andrea Cruz Angon, who's the coordinator of biodiversity strategies and cooperation at CONABIO. Andrea, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I didn't prepare a presentation because there was a little bit of confusion, but I will like to also talk on the Mexico experience and then just be very brief about the gender plan of action of the post-2020 regarding country actions on this topic. As you may know, Mexico has a solid ground of institutions and legal reforms and a legal framework to reinforce women empowerment. However, it's also what it's needed, it's effective implementation. So that's the thing that we need to really work on as a society, to inform and to have very well-rounded institutions that already have their legal framework, at least a basic legal framework to advance on that. And for the National Biodiversity Strategy, Mexico was the first country to incorporate the gender perspective in this biodiversity strategy. And we did it in two ways. First, we had a very general principle of equal participation and respecting the differences among everybody in the NBSAP. And then with the help of Lorena Aguilar, with the great help of Lorena Aguilar and Itza Castañeda, we developed a methodology and a consultation process with women leaders and experts to revise the diagnosis of the NBSAP and then all the components of the NBSAP in order to identify strategic actions where the gender perspective should be explicit. And we did do with a workshop that was mainly comprised with women participating, but also with men that have other perspective of new masculinities, and this was very enriching and very helpful to understand the topic. And then after these 60 something women and men that review the strategy, then there was a special task force that did a very thorough review. And also we had the collaboration of the National Institution of Women, who helped us also to review the language and see that it was a inclusive language. And as a result of this, we have, for the first time, that more than half of the people that participated in the elaboration of our NBSAP were women.
Dos vidrios.
Oh,
Los vidrios del vaso que rompiste.
there is something, sorry. So we have more women participating than men for the NBSAP elaboration. And as a result of that, 19 out of the 24 lines of actions have explicit mention of the gender perspective. 50 out of the 160 specific actions have also very explicit gender perspective. And we have an extra column that we call specifications, which are like additional information that needs to be taken into account when you are implementing a specific action. And in this column of specification of our action plan, we had also 44 specifications that say that we need to be careful in taking into account women and girls. So in general, strategic access on threats and drivers of biodiversity loss is the axis that has the most explicit gender perspective, to emphasize the need to promote women participation in all levels in order to halt, mitigate, or reverse biodiversity loss. And so this was our NBSAP. And after that experience, we have also been conducted other local biodiversity strategies where we are trying to also incorporate the gender perspective. And so far, 2 states of Mexico, Hidalgo and Mexico City, have already their strategies with the gender perspective component into that. So we are building also more experience on that. Regarding capacity building, we have a very small GEF project to enhance the implementation of our NBSAP. And with that, we conduct a specific workshop to build capacity with women in order to see or to identify projects that were either conducted or that have a very specific women participation. So we identified 45 projects that have very well-grounded leadership of women, community leaders from NGOs, environmental funds, international organizations. And in this workshop, we also identified what were the barriers and the opportunities for these women in order to get more involved in the NBSAP implementation. And we had a big list, but of these barriers and opportunities, but I think it's a way forward in order to be more effective identifying what are the gaps that we need to address in this issue. And for example, one of the things that they mention is that they need to get involved more effectively in the participating the planning processes, in the knowledge generation, in the representation of political seats, of political incidents, and of course have enhanced leadership. And for that they need capacity building. And in the areas where we identify that there are most women participating is, of course, regarding traditional knowledge documentation, like within biocultural protocols related to plants and seeds, in plant nurseries, in forestry, and sustainable business, in restoration and payment for ecosystem services, forest management, ecotourism, certified agriculture, and fisheries. And we were very surprised that we have a lot of women participating in fisheries that are really getting very empowered, and they are doing a lot of great things regarding to fisheries. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about, just as Malawi said, is that we also try to make our best effort to try to reflect this in our 6th national report. So when we were elaborating it, we asked for most of the institutions to give us disaggregated data and statistics. It was very hard, and I think that's why it's very important to have this gender plan of action, because it helps us to keep the focus on that, and so that it's and it's good also to have it in the GBF to be sure that whenever there is an opportunity to disaggregate data, we need to put a focus on that. So we also ask specific case studies where gender perspective was important element of the project, and so that's what we did. And I think more than half of our Aichi targets have at least one gender perspective issue, but it was hard, and that's one lesson learned, that not all the institutions have this kind of data, and this would be very important to start gathering this data so that it's easier for them to produce the statistics when we ask for it. And regarding the 2020 gender plan of actions, we have not done a careful review. We are it's being consulted now with other institutions, but this I would think in a very general way that this is the way forward. We think that it's a good thing to have aligned positions with other MEAs, and this will enhance coherence and synergies, just as Verona says, and we agree with that. We also think that it might be useful to have specific actions and having additional columns to have. I think it would be hard to have just one option, but I think it would help parties a lot to have options of deliverables and actors and timelines, so that parties can have like a good menu of things to do, and not just one, but just a menu of the things that can do, and they can prioritize on the way forward to that. And for sure, it would be, I mean, it's going to be very important for this gender plan of action to be aligned for sure with the global biodiversity framework. So that would be my comments for now. Thank you very much, Tanya, for the invitation, and we are very happy to participate, to continue participating in these webinars. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for that presentation. We are a little bit over time, and so I hope that everyone is comfortable with maybe staying a couple of minutes more. I know that we have a couple of questions for both Mexico and Stella, and so I'll read both questions out, and I invite perhaps both Stella and Andrea to respond respectively, hopefully keeping maybe responses to under a minute if possible, and then we will be moving to closing remarks. I know that Tanya will be reading through all of the questions in the chat period point, and so if there's anything that kind of needs to be followed up with after the webinar, that will be done kind of in an offline portion. But the question first to Mexico for Andrea. What are their ongoing plans to fully integrate women and girls in the development of the post-2020? Are they planning to apply something like their work they did for their NBSAPs 5 years ago to the post-2020? And then for Stella, it's very important contribution of already 75% in farmer projects, project model for other countries and localities. In this project, is there are they ensuring equitable benefits for women and girls, youth and men in these projects? So maybe I'll invite Andrea to go first for the Mexico question, and then Stella for the question on their equitable sharing of benefits.
Yeah, thank you, Vienna. I think for sure we will do that for the update of our NBSAP. Our NBSAP already has a 2030 vision, and it's already aligned to the SDGs. So unless we received other instruction, we will keep more or less our actual NBSAP as it is, and we will align it to the new global biodiversity framework and have perhaps national goals or targets aligned to this GBF. But for sure, I'm sure that we will do some kind of work in order to reinforce women participation in these processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And Stella, I don't know if you had a response with regards to the question of the farmer projects, and are these projects ensuring equitable benefits for women, girls, youth, and men?
Thank you very much, Vienna. On the, for example, the project on beekeeping, which is happening in one of the forest reserves, and of course other projects are around the country. Mostly at project level, you would have equitable distribution of benefits. But the next step is to study what happens at the household level. At project level, it depends on who is participating. If there are 10 people participating and we have realized $100 from the program, it means each one will get $10. At project level, it is easy to manage, but the dynamics mostly are at household level. The $10 that the 75% who are women have taken to their homes, who is controlling that $10? And mostly, this previous studies, it has shown that it is still the men. For the program that we are working on now in Zalanyama and other programs that are being managed by the forestry department, after the project year, we can provide new data on what's happening at household level. But at project level, the benefit sharing is equitable based on your participation. But at household level, it is something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella, for that response. I note that there's a lot of great conversation happening in the chat, and not necessarily questions, but just comments, focusing in a lot on the current indicator review and, you know, importance of mainstreaming gender considerations throughout. I know that we've noted a little bit of a gap in terms of having gender indicators mainstream throughout the framework and not just under the one target on gender and IPLCs. So that's, I think, a really great conversation and something that I hope all of those that have not yet put in their submissions are going to move forward and maybe comment on as well in the peer review of the STPSA documents. I think that we have wrapped up our current question period and our current presentation. So I'd like to thank all the presenters today, all of the hard work that Tanya put in terms of putting together this presentation and the document. And I hope everyone will be involved in providing comments on the draft gender plan of action. And so I just wanted to say thank you everyone for coming today and participating and sharing your comments and questions online. And the presentations, as posted in the chat, will be shared with the group. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Tanya for some closing remarks.
Thanks very much, Vienna, and thanks everyone. Verona, Stella, Andrea, it was great to hear your comments today and see all the questions and remarks in the chat. Certainly there's a lot of distance still to cover in terms of developing just the outline itself and the plan going forward. So I really appreciate your participation today, including now as we've gone over a bit in time. But we're really counting on active engagement from parties and from stakeholders to ensure that we can come up with a plan that is going to help make a difference in effective implementation. As people have mentioned, this is a challenge at every level, and we recognize that. But you know, as much as we can position this plan or this new plan to be able to support and help direct or further advance country actions where possible, I think that would be a great step forward. So the process is very much meant to be an ongoing consultative exercise. So we will be coming back at regular intervals with revisions, requesting input, and looking for other opportunities to have this kind of online conversation. So I you know, we'll keep all of you informed as we go forward, and noting that in the timing that we're in, we can't set exact timelines for things right now, or they may just change. But in any case, I hope this is the start of an active and ongoing discussion with all of you on developing a new plan that can be a good step forward for the CBD and also help support other international commitments that have been agreed through the SDGs and other conventions. So thank you very much again. I hope you have a good rest of day or evening, and I look forward to your inputs in this process again, right now requested for the end of this month. So thank you.
I want to show myself.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nice to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.